Hi there, so we're live on Facebook, just trying to get my, there we go, I'm trying to get my Insta to go live again as well. For some reason it's not going. Just give me a second, and then we can start this week. I'm just going to quickly take the phone off the stand here, there we go. Okay, so for those of you that are logging in on Facebook, awesome. I can see that you're getting there. Brilliant. I'm trying to get myself to go live on Instagram as well. So welcome. Remember, if you would like me to say hi, put your name in the comments so I can give you a shout out. There we go. Checking connection. Insta is at last going. Yay, there we go. We got it right. Welcome, Catherine. I can see you've logged in. Hope you're doing well today. And yeah, we'll see how the people start logging in. I can see there's quite a few people on my Facebook Live already. So if you want me to say hi, just say hi, and then I can see it in the comments. Welcome, Marie. I can see you've just logged in as well. Today's going to be a little bit different. I'm doing something out of the norm, breaking away from my single series for a bit. And this week has definitely been a little bit of inspiration for that. Oh goodness, then my stands just dropped for the Insta. That's funny. All right, so let's get started today. If you're joining me, I was actually thinking today, am I going to be able to do a live? Are my eyes still too swollen? But I think this is something that I really love doing. So I decided I'm going to show up anyway, regardless of what my eyes look like. It's been a tough week for me. Most of you that know me personally, Colette, I can see you've just logged in. Welcome. Also Daniel, all the way from the UK. Awesome. So for those of you that know me personally, it's been a rough week. My cat of about 14 and a half, I had to say goodbye to him. It was the most amazing cat in the world. Wild cat that the mom had babies in Angola, of all places, Luanda. And my husband brought him home for us to look after because he couldn't leave him there after he finished working in Angola. So very happy to have had this cat for most of my life. He's been my child. Thankfully, I have another one that can support me now. Because they are just amazing souls to have around. Pets really do have the ability to lower cortisol. There's just so many benefits in having pets around, but it's been a little bit of a rough week. And I think what it's made me do is think again, and like seriously think again, reminding me why I went on this journey of doing things more naturally and doing things more holistically. And it's quite cool that way because it just again refreshed my memory on why I decided to choose the path that I am on now. So why do so many animals get lymphoma? And when you start going through that grieving process, you go through a phase where there's a lot of blaming involved. And I was blaming myself. I mean, how was I feeding them the wrong food? What was I doing? And I think part of that process is understanding that we can only do the best we can with the information we have at that stage. So perhaps it was the food, who knows? The thing is that with most of the medications we get these days, even with a serious disease like the big C, especially the chronic ones, the life expectancy or the increase in life expectancy for most of these diseases when you start taking quite serious medications for it, it usually extends the life by about 4 months. And you've got to ask yourself, that life extension, is that time? Because that's probably what it is. It's mostly time. It's very rarely quality of life. And I think most of us that have decided to go the more natural route definitely start focusing a lot more on quality of life. So we don't necessarily want to live until we're 150, but if we do, please can we do it with the least amount of discomfort possible. And it sent me on this journey thinking about the quality of food I was eating myself, the quality of thoughts that I'm putting through my mind, the quality of products that I'm putting onto my skin or that I'm consuming on a daily basis, the supplements, for example. Because if you think about it, if I can just tell you a little bit about my history, why quality is so important to me. Many years ago, if I actually knew that all the medications that I was taking to support injuries or discomfort in my body, if the doctors then said when they prescribed this medication to me, you know what, this is going to solve your symptoms now, but hey, when you're around 30, 35, you are probably going to become intolerant to at least 10 to 20 different food types, because the medication actually gives leaky gut syndrome, especially if you have a genetic predisposition to that, or if you're a little bit more sensitive. So go ahead, use the medication. It's going to make you feel like $1 million right now, but you are going to pay the price in 10 or 20 years time. If I knew then what I knew now, I would definitely have said no, and I would have found alternative methods to support the discomfort that I was feeling in my body, because that's exactly what happened. I have been suffering with poor gut health for probably most of my life, not knowing about it, because at that stage it wasn't information that I had, and all the medications I was using was actually causing my body a lot of harm. And to this day, there's certain foods that I simply cannot eat that causes severe inflammation in my body because of the damage that was done to my gut through the years with all the medications and the poor quality food, and those kind of things that I was putting into my body. So let's look today at quality of essential oils. Now, this is something very close to my heart, because in doing the research where I discovered that I sort of really had to make a drastic change in my life to start looking after my health, and wellness became a very big thing for me. And you'll see essential oils everywhere now. There's a very good reason why they've become so popular. I think people have reached a stage now where they understand that plant can be medicine, and it always was medicine. And if you know how to use it appropriately, then obviously you are going to be supporting your body. And this is where quality is quite important to me, because I tend to always want to buy the best thing I can for the amount of money I have at that specific time. And it becomes incredibly important when you start looking at essential oils, for example, because they have very many benefits. And the reason they're so popular is because they really can support the body. But you do need to understand that probably about 95% or more than 95% of what is in the market are actually not pure essential oils. So they're not going to have a beneficial supportive effect on your body if that's what you're wanting to use them for. So things that you always look out for is quality and testing, for example, what the consumer education is like by the company that is producing the essential oils. Do they even consider safety? And do they assess the safety of their oils, what they're going to do to your body? And also then, of course, something that's close to many people's heart is sustainable sourcing. Our Earth's resources are running out. And the plants that we are going to be sourcing these essential oils from need to be sustainable as well. I mean, just think about frankincense and how precious it is and how supportive to the body it can be. But if they go and tear or slash the tree too many times in a year, you are going to kill that tree. I can see Gad is also just logged in. Welcome, welcome. So sustainability also plays a really big role, and there's a couple of things therefore that you do need to look out before you choose your essential oil company that you want to support. And today I'm going to be focusing on quality, and this is probably one of the biggest reasons why I partnered my wellness business with the company that I chose, because their essential oils are pure. Their essential oils are tested grade, and I, being a scientist, I needed my oils that I was using to be backed by good scientific research, by clinical studies, by actually having the facts, not me going to scour the internet for what Facebook is teaching me about oils, or Instagram for that matter. Yes, a lot of us use these social media platforms to assist and to provide continued education, exactly like I'm doing today. But in finding that company is, what are they doing with their oils? Are they testing them? So let's talk a little bit about that today. So there's two things that you need to look at, is purity and potency. And what's the difference between those two? So purity basically means that there are no additional components in there. So here we're talking contaminants or fillers. And then when we look at potency, we are referring to the chemical accuracy. In other words, the chemical constituents and the ratios of the chemical constituents in that plant. Because the plant chemistry is what's going to give your body the support that it needs. And if the correct chemistry is not there, it's probably not going to do what you need it to do. And the chemistry can be affected quite heavily on where the plant is grown. In other words, is it thriving in that habitat? The soil conditions, is it used to it? What are the climates like? What seasons does that plant prefer? When does it like for it to be a rainy season during the year? All of those things actually play a role, even the altitude that the plant has been grown at. And that is also specifically going to start affecting the chemotypes. So Yes, we're getting in a lot of information today, and that's why you need to have a trusted company, because not everyone's going to have the scientific backing or the understanding or the know-how on how to read some of these reports. But if you completely trust the company that you're with and the essential oils that you're buying, then you're obviously going to know, you've done a little bit of research, and you're going to trust that they know what they're doing. And then these things will become a little bit easier to understand. So chemotypes, what I'm referring to here, something, for example, like thyme essential oil, depending on where it's grown and altitude, you can have a chemotype that is predominant. So thyme oil is thyme oil is thyme oil, right? Definitely not. Even from the same species of plant, the chemotypes may differ. So what this basically means is the plant grows in different areas, for example, but things that can affect these variants is botanical origin, and also compositional difference with important toxicological consequences starts playing a role. So here, essential oils that are higher in certain constituents may be a little bit more harsh on your body compared to a lighter one, for example. So here, just look, for example, at something like spearmint versus peppermint, where the menthol concentration actually differs. So thyme specifically, it can have a chemotype which is either predominant in carvacrol and thymol, which is the one that most of us have. That's actually the one that's sold mostly worldwide. But it can also be stronger in borneol, for example, or in geraniol. Linalool, you get thyme species that are linalool dominant, and tugenol, for example. So it always depends on what it is that you're going to be using the specific oil for. I can also see Golden Chick 420, cool name, has joined IGE, and Mandy Kurtzen, welcome. So chemotypes play a role, and it's not something you need to get into a serious tiff about, but just understand that there are main constituents. So although there's usually between, I'd say, 1 and 5 main chemical constituents that are going to give you the physical benefits for that specific essential oil, the rest, so usually the chemical constituents that are there in 1% or less, they are still there for a reason, and they can still have a physical effect on your body. And I think this is something that most people don't understand, or that the general public don't know. So when you produce something in the lab and it's a synthesized chemical constituents, and you put those chemical constituents together, and then you can say this is a lavender, when in fact it's not, because you haven't isolated it from the real lavender plant. But you could mimic that oil by producing it in a lab. The thing is, you're now not going to have the same benefits, because all those chemical constituents that are there in very small percentages, even though they're less than 1%, for example, you're not going to get the benefit of those specific chemical constituents. And this is why synthetic versus the real thing plays such an important role. So if there's anything that I can tell you to look out for in your essential oil company, or the brand that you're going to be purchasing, for you to know whether it's a reputable company, they definitely can have the species name of that plant on the bottle. Without it, you don't know that it's actually coming from a plant. It may have actually been produced in a laboratory. And then it's definitely not going to have the, what you're looking for. It's not going to have that supportive benefit. And for you to know whether they're actually testing their oil, there needs to be a batch code. If there's no batch code on the bottle, 100% they're not testing that oil, because there's absolutely no quality control. And then also, don't always take your company's word for it. A trustworthy company will always make available the tests performed on every single essential oil. Why? Because it costs them a lot of money to make sure that that oil is pure. So if they're not willing to give you the test results, you've got to question, are these oils pure? Have they in fact tested them? So those are the 3 main things that you need to find at least on a bottle, and definitely ask them for the test results. There's no reason why they should withhold that from you, even if you don't understand what they mean. Just having a GCMS result, for example, shows you that the oil is at least, the essential oil company is at least considering safety, and that they are actually testing their oils to check that they haven't been adulterated. And while we're getting on that word adulterated, because the oil industry is largely unregulated, it's quite tricky to find good quality essential oils that are pure and that are potent. There's probably roughly, I'd say between less than a handful, I think, companies in the world who are actually using or producing, essential oils that are 100% pure through the board, through all of their oils. So you may find some companies that have a pure lavender, for example, but their peppermint is adulterated, or they have a pure eucalyptus, for example, but their wild orange is adulterated, something like that. And it's finding a company that you can trust, because you know all the oils are pure, because then you definitely know that you're going the right route. So let's talk about adulteration and contamination and what it actually is and what it means and why someone would adulterate an oil. Well, purpose of adulteration, it's actually, it's quite logical if you start thinking about it, is because they want to increase their profit. So by adding either odorous or non-odorous substances in order to dilute the essential oil, they can make more money. So odorous adulterants can include things like other essential oils that are cheaper to produce, where they use a lot less plant material, for example. Can be essential oil fractions or residues, and then even synthetic components that are produced in the lab. It's actually quite cheap to make them in the lab. And if you think about it, the non-odorous adulterants are extenders. So these are things that are going to make more of what it is of the starting material that they started off with. So things like ethanol, for example, mineral oils, a lot of people use glycols, phthalates, and fixed oils such as rapeseed oil, for example. Now, phthalates is something I'm quite concerned about, because there's a lot of chemicals that actually come through in essential oils, specifically solvents and things like phthalates and biocides, for example, from pesticides, because people are not producing the plants without chemicals, number one, so they're using chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and then these get cross-contaminated or transferred. So let's look into a little bit more detail here. So things like, let's go to the most common essential oils, for example. So most common essential oils are probably going to be higher risk for contamination or adulteration, because they are the ones that are purchased more often. But here the price is gonna play a role. So if we look at the very expensive oil to produce, so for example rose oil, I did a live last week on rose oil. So 10,000 blooms required to produce just 5 milliliters of oil. So rose, because it's so expensive to produce, is definitely going to be one of those that is most adulterated. We also look at oils, for example, sandalwood, neroli, jasmine. They are all very heavily adulterated in the industry. If you start looking at oils, for example, that are not as expensive but very routinely used, and that synthetic components can be made really easily, things like tea tree oil, for example, and coriander seed oil, they're actually very adulterated. Where very cheap essential oils, for example, orange oil and eucalyptus, they're probably some of the cheapest oils to produce. They tend to not be adulterated, because then the process of producing those chemically could be a little bit more than actually isolating it from the real plant. There's also something that they call passing off. So this is where they pass off something as being the real thing. So even if there's nothing of the original plant in there. So here, methyl salicylate could be passed off, for example, as wintergreen. Wintergreen is one of the most adulterated oils, and adulterated here is not even the right word. It's just pure pass off, because there's absolutely no wintergreen plant in that specific essential oil. Synthetic benzaldehyde can, for example, be sold as bitter almond oil, because they have a very similar flavor profile or aromatic profile. So these things play a role, especially when you start looking what it's going to do to your body. So when you have an adulteration with phthalates, now where do the phthalates come in? So they're plasticizers. They're actually in a lot of foods, for example. They're in a lot of the beauty care products that we use, and there's a big warning out about them, because the larger group of them are actually causing a lot of hormone disruptions. Endocrine disruptors is what we call them. They can also have reproductive toxicity, for example, and also a very disastrous to the gastrointestinal tract. But they use them because they stretch the essential oils with the phthalates. You're not supposed to say the pH. It's very difficult for my tongue to say that one. So there are a lot of essential oils that are actually extended by using phthalates, which is quite concerning regarding the health side effects that you are going to be experiencing from that specific oil. If we look at solvents, for example, benzene has been used for very many years to extract concretes, and although the use has declined considerably, you do still find things like benzene in essential oils. There's biocides. Now, biocides are the pesticides that or herbicides that they use while they're growing the plant. So something, for example, as simple as peppermint, they use fungicides because they are prone to rust, for example. And a lot of these chemicals get transferred and actually potentized or concentrated during the steam distillation process. So not only are you going to then concentrate the aromatic compounds from that specific plant, but you're also doing the same thing comes through the steam distillation process of these pesticides and the herbicides. So always something to look into when your company doesn't want to give you lab results, because if you think about it, the olfactory evaluation, so us just smelling an oil, for example, to a trained nose, it's very useful. It's an adjunct, though. You can't base the quality of an oil on just what it smells like, because you can't detect the non-odorous adulterants. But things that can be detected through testing, and the types of testing is when you're doing specific gravity, so SG, optical rotation, for example, refractive index, solubility of the essential oil, for example, and alcohols, those kind of things. And you need to always combine that with GC testing. And we always talk about GCMS. It's actually two separate tests. So gas chromatography is the one, and then mass spectrometry is the other one, and those are the two that are usually combined. But if we start looking into a little bit more detail about the testing and just comparing sort of which oils are the most adulterated in the market, that's maybe a nice list. So if you would like me to send you a specific list, I'm not going to tell you what they're contaminated with. That's going to take quite a long time, but I can send you a list of the most contaminated or adulterated oils in the market. Just put in the comments for me, adulterated, and then I'll send you that list of oils. So bergamot is right at the top of the list, and it's usually contaminated or adulterated with other citrus oils, acetylated hoe oil, synthetic linalool oil, because it's very cheap to produce, limonene or linalool acetate. In grapefruit, even grapefruit can be adulterated through the use of orange terpenes, purified limonene. Jasmine, obviously, because it's a very precious and expensive oil to produce. So those are ylang-ylang fractions that they sometimes use, or even artificial jasmine bases can be used. Synthetic jasminones, they're called. Lavender. So lavender is a firm favorite. And here it's quite scary. I'll go into a little bit more detail here about the lavender, for example. But lavender is very routinely contaminated or adulterated with something we call lavandin. Now, lavandin is a completely different plant. It's got a similar aromatic profile, I guess, but it does different things, all right? So if you're wanting a lavender oil and you're getting a lavandin, then obviously it hasn't been labeled correctly, and you're definitely not going to get the benefits that you would associate normally with something like lavender. Lemon is a very highly adulterated oil as well, through things like orange terpenes, and natural oils or synthetic. Lemongrass, they use synthetic citral for that. Patchouli, I didn't know that, but patchouli is also quite adulterated, and usually with vegetable oils, because they've got to get that thicker viscosity. Patchouli is a thicker oil. It's usually contaminated or adulterated with cedarwood oil, for example, and patchouli vetiver and camphor distillate residue. So when they're actually distilling, and the residues that remain, because they contain some of the aromatic compounds, they actually just add that back in to extend their oils. Peppermint is very routinely adulterated with something called corn oil, which is a Japanese mint. And I'll talk a little bit about peppermint specifically and lavender in a second. Pine oils are also very routinely adulterated with turpentine oils. Rose oil, obviously, because it's so expensive to produce. Rosemary, usually adulterated with things like eucalyptus or even white camphor. Sandalwood, very routinely adulterated, and ylang-ylang. So there's a lot of essential oils that I think we always, that we use quite routinely, that we don't always think about being at a risk for being adulterated. So good to go and find a company that you really trust. So if we look at, for example, the peppermint versus that corn mint scenario, true peppermint comes from the plant called Mentha peperetta. And corn mint is very inferior and much less expensive oil. You also need a lot of less of the plant to actually produce the same quantity of essential oils. But the corn mint comes from Mentha arvensis. Now, corn mint is very high in menthol. And I don't know if you remember when we were still younger, we used to buy those menthol crystals from the pharmacies because we used to use that to open up congestion. So very regularly used for steaming, for example. Now, the corn mint plant, that's actually where they get the menthol from. So what basically happens is the corn mint is incredibly high in menthol. And then they take that menthol part out, they crystallize it out. So the leftover dementhalized corn mint oil is then used to adulterate peppermint oil to extend it. And why that would be a problem, for example, if we are after the menthol anyway, well, when you're taking out that menthol component, there's a lack of complexity, and you only get a fraction of the whole oil. So all those teeny tiny small percentage of chemical constituents, you're not going to get that either. And it's never the corn mint oil that comes out of the still that you're getting a fraction of that. So things like limonene and cineol, for example, things to look out for, lots of chemical constituent names here that I'm not going to actually read now in my notes, but the chemical constituents themselves and the ratios actually vary quite significantly between the spearmint and the peppermint as well. And to a trained eye on the GCMS, it's going to be incredibly visible when that oil has been adulterated. Let's look at our favorite lavender. Most people that don't like lavender, newsflash, I'm going to tell you why. Because you've probably been smelling something that has been adulterated with lavender, because lavender has got a much higher concentration, for example, of borneol and 1.8 cineol, a little bit more eucalyptusy, for example. So it's got a very harsh medicinal smell. And I think most people, when they smell a very pure tester-grade lavender, completely change their mind about lavender, because that's for the first time in their lives that they then smell true lavender. So the lavender and the lavandin is also something that usually gets quite adulterated. So definitely make sure that you're getting a pure essential oil. All right, so I just want to quickly go through the rest of this notes here. If you can just give me a second. So what kind of testing are we looking at? Why is this testing that Tania is talking about so incredibly important? Well, there are a lot of different tests that can be performed, but if I can just basically summarize them. So organoleptic is very important. That's how it sort of feels in your fingers. So if it's got a very oily feel to it, there's usually some carrier oil in it, for example. And usually the smell, to a very trained nose, they could smell if something is quite different, the lavandin, for example, compared to the lavender. But usually this is the sight, the smell, the taste, and the touch that they talk about. Microbial testing is quite important to check that there is no cross-contamination from bacterial species that can grow. And so this usually is not because they've added bacteria in. Believe it or not everyone out there is there to get you. This just basically shows that there's unhygienic practices in the process of bottling. So where they are, for example, going from the still, putting it into the bottles, and that the bottles might not have been clean, or something in the process is not clean. Gas chromatography. So this is where we can see which compounds are present in that specific sample, and this is where you're going to see if they've added some other chemical constituents in there that are man-made, especially when you start looking at the ratios. So the ratios, the composition, is where we're talking about the mass spectrometry, because it gives you the percentages that specific chemical constituent is in that oil, or what it's present in that oil. So that's where we're talking about the GCMS. So make sure that's probably one of the certificates that you should be asking for your specific batch of oil that you're purchasing. Remember, you need that batch code on the specific bottle. And some companies, or the company that I use, we actually have a website where we can just go put the batch code that's on the bottle into that website, and I can get the GCMS results specifically for that batch of oil. So that makes me really happy. There's also something called Fourier transform infrared spectrometry. So infrared spectrometry is something we use in the labs quite routinely. And this is where it's the refractive index. So there's a laser that gets sent through the sample. And because of the way that the light then bends, the machine actually measures that refraction. And if you have a standard to work from, in other words, what a pure oil should be, if you then compare that, so when you're running the samples, you can then see whether this oil is different from the actual pure one. And then you can very quickly pick up when something has been adulterated, because it absorbs or adsorbs the laser particles, the light particles, at a different rate. Chirality testing is very important, and you would have seen on my page earlier in the week I actually posted this. I love the graphic of it. So it's the right and the left hand. If we can be a little bit more descriptive, the right and the left boob. There's always one that's bigger. Nothing in nature is ever identical, all right? So what happens is here, this is where they very quickly pick up when something has been adulterated in a lab, because in nature, there's always going to be a variance in ratio between the left molecule and the right molecule. In other words, the two isomers. Whereas something is produced in a lab, it's almost always going to be 50-50 for the left and the right, if you think about it that way, because that's how chemicals are produced. So when it's there in 50-50, it's a very highly rate or likeliness that it's going to be an adulterated oil made in a lab, chemical constituents. So the synthetic elements, in other words. We also do isotopic analysis. Now, the isotopic analysis is to determine, was the lavender sourced from two different areas, for example? So have they combined lavender from different fields? And the isotopic isotopic analysis shows you then when different plants from different areas in the world have been combined, and if they were supposed to come from one single source, then obviously you'll know that that essential oil has been adulterated. And heavy metal testing, I think that's quite important because of the heavy metals that we do find in certain soils, especially in areas where they use very heavy chemical pesticides and fertilizers. You are going to get crossover there, and the heavy metals can definitely be detected in essential oils as well through testing. So they call it ICP-MS. It's also mass spectrometry, but it's a different type of mass spectrometry that you need to do. Got to do with ionization. So yes, there's a lot of big words, a lot of chemical names for all these tests, but definitely you need to understand and feel secure in which company's oils you are using, especially if you're going to be starting to use them to support your health like I do on a daily basis. And I needed to make the conscious choice for my body to stop using all the medications that I was using, because they were causing me quite a lot of harm. Now, it might not cause harm in your body at all. You may find that your body copes really well with certain chemicals, but if you are a little bit more sensitive, please have a look at essential oils, because they are incredibly supportive, and they're definitely not going to have some of the side effects that you can get from some of the medications. So yes, that was quite a mouthful today, but I really did want to just alert you that there are a lot of oils out there. There's a really good reason why essential oils are so popular. They really have a lot of power in them. They can be used very extensively to support your health on a daily basis, but then you do need to make sure that you are using a very pure and potent quality oil that has been tested. So number one, is there a species name on my bottle? Number two, is there a batch code? And number three, is the company I'm purchasing from willing to provide me with a lab result for that specific batch of oil? Those are the three things you need to look at, especially when you're starting to use a new company's oil. And because I am so passionate about teaching about essential oils and what they can do for your health, if any of you are on here today that have not yet attended one of my Discover 101 classes, and you are not already in contact with a doTERRA wellness advocate, then please comment in the section, or in the comments, just write there Discover, so that I can send you a booking link to attend my class this evening. It runs every Thursday evening at 7:15, but that is definitely only for someone who has not got a membership yet and who is not in contact with a wellness advocate yet. But it is my absolute passion to be able to teach about these oils and how to use them safely. So there's another learning opportunity for you this evening as well. Thank you so much for joining today. I hope it wasn't too sciencey, but I do need to throw in some science every now and then. It is my absolute passion, and it is my absolute joy to be able to share that. We can always only do the best with the information we have at hand at that specific time. So now you know. So now the conscious is on you deciding on what you're going to do with this information. Are you going to ignore it and keep on using the impure stuff? Or are you actually going to make a change in your life, use the information, and go and seek purer oils? Have a great day. Cheerio.